The sun hung low and heavy over the Aegean Sea, casting long, bruised shadows across the water. It was the bled deep the Common Era of the year 490 before the Common Era, and the world held its breath. On the plains of Marathon, the air tasted of salt, iron, and impending annihilation. You might wonder how a small, fractious city-state like Athens dared to stand against the crushing weight of the Achaemenid Empire. If you enjoy unraveling the tactical genius that shifts the course of human destiny, take unraveling the tacticon. Take a moment to subscribe so we can continue exploring these moments where the impossible hangs over Putin became reality. On this particular morning, however, there was no room for churning the surf and the rhythmic, terrifying thud of thousands of phases finding perched on the sandy shore. The Persian fleet was not just a collection of ships. It was a floating city, a manifestation of the great King Darius, whose reach was supposed to be absolute, come to punish the Greeks for their defiance and scatter its people to the winds like chaff. Yet, in the hearts of the Athenian hoplites, there was jagged Athenian hoplites. There was a desperate, jagged sort of hope. They were farmers, craftsmen, and citizens, not professional killers, but they were fighting for the very soil that fed their families. As the dust began to obscure the hills, the tension was so profound, the vibration of the earth itself. The Persians were almost heroes in the art of intimidation. Their archers are ready to blot out the sun. Their infantry armored in shield of shimmy in bronze and wicker shields, expecting the Greeks to break at the mere sight of their overwhelming numbers. But they did not know the Athenian commander, Miltiades. He watched the enemy from the tree line, his eyes tracking the movement of every Persian unit, his mind calculating variables that seemed to any rational observer like the frantic scribblings of a madman. Miltiades was a man of iron nerves and a deep, visceral understanding of the terrain, relied on a defensive combination of swarming numbers and long-range archery, a strategy that had crushed dozens of civilizations across Asia and Egypt. He also noticed a critical vulnerability in their deployment, a flaw that would be invisible to familiar with the marshy, uneven topography of the Marathon plain, accosted by the geographic plain. The Persians were bunched up by the geography, and most importantly, their fearsome cavalry was absent. Ephesian rumors whispered among the Athenian ranks, perhaps to strike at the city itself, while the army kept the Athenians pinned here. The silence of the morning, the Greeks, this was the moment, was shattered not by a scream, but by a command that defied everything the Greeks knew about traditional warfare. With the slow, measured pace of a traditional phalanx, he ordered them to run. It was a gamble of staggering proportions. To sprint toward an enemy capable of raining death from 100 yards away was suicide. The hoplites tightened their grip on their heavy circular shields, checked the weight of their ashwood spears, and began to move in first a jog, then a steady grinding pace, and finally a full-blown forward, their armor clanking in a dissonant symphony of bows. The Persian archers, caught in the transition of drawing their bows, hesitated. They were used to enemies who broke before the contact, enemies who feared the Persian shadows, prepared for a wall of sharpened iron coming at them like a tidal wave. Impact came with the sickening screech of shields grinding together. The center of the Athenian line, intentionally weakened by Miltiades, began to buckle under the sheer weight of the Persian elite. Hymenians, the great king's forces poured into resistance. They pushed forward, deeper into resistance. This was exactly what Miltiades had planned. While the centaurs receded, the Athenian flanks, held by the most veteran soldiers, suddenly pivoted inward. They swung shut like the heavy doors of a temple, slamming into the Persian mass from the sides. The Persians, once the masters of the field and unable, constricted, squeezed, eporia to utilize of the Greeks and terraphobic nightmare. The long, heavy spears of the Greeks performed with terrifying efficiency, piercing the lighter Persian armor as if it were parchment. Panic began to ripple through the Persian ranks, a contagion more lethal than any arrow. They looked for their officers, for some signal to reform, but the Athenian pressure was relentless. The sea, once their avenue of conquest, now became their only desperate path to survival. They turned and fled, not in a tactical retreat toward the marshy terrain that had initially provided some protection for the beachhead, the same mud that once slowed the Athenian advance now became a quagmire for the fleeing invaders. The slaughter was precise, cold, and absolute. As the sun set, the plain of Marathon looked less like a battlefield. The Persian fleet, once the pride into the darkness, weighed anchor and slipped away into the darkness, leaving their dead behind to be picked over by the scavengers of the coast. It was impossible. The Athenians stood among the wreckage of the Chiads, covered in the grime the wreckage, exhausted, covered in the grime of a victory they had been told They had not only survived, they had shattered the myth of Persian invincibility, seeing the dazed expressions of those who were realizing that they had just changed the future of the world. Had they failed, the culture, the art, and the very concept of democracy that was budding in Athens would have likely been ground into the dust of history. The victory at Marathon did not just end a battle. It acted that a small group of citizens fighting for their own autonomy could stand against the limitless of a tyrant, could stand against the lingering sense of unease. Yet even in victory there was a lingering sense of unheard. The men on the beach knew that the Persians of unease. Darius would not let this sting go unanswered. The war for the soul of Greece had only just begun. But for this night, the fires burned bright on the Athenian hills, and the messengers were being prepared to carry the news of the miracle to the city. One such runner, as legend tells, would push his body to the point of total collapse to ensure the news arrived before the remaining Persian ships could reach the port of Athens. It was a testament to the sheer physical and mental toll of the day, the strategic of intense study for historians today. He managed to manipulate both the enemy's psychology and the landscape. He managed to manipulate boats to victory, turning a desperate defensive stand into a crushing offensive victory. He utilized the hoplite formation's greatest strength, its heavy, unyielding charge, and adapted it to a dynamic high-stake advantage, its compting his center. It was a masterclass in risk management. By thinning his center, he effectively invited the Persians into a slaughterhouse of his own design. Hajjantati, it is the kind of decision that, had it failed, who threw away the lives of his countrymen. Instead, he is remembered as the architect of a defense that defined an era. History is often written by the victors, but Marathon is an instance where the victory itself forced the hands of the defeated. The Persians, shaken by the realization that the Greeks were a different breed of fighter, would spend years rethinking their approach to the for century Ainzuin Phalanxan Pilcenter to the influencing military doctrine from the Macedonian Phalanxin Heim to the modern concepts of maneuver warfare. The lesson of Marathon is simple yet profound, a way to tilt the scales of fate through audacity and calculated movement in way quadestrat movement. When we consider the weight of this event, we have to ask ourselves what would have become of Western civilization without that desperate sprint across the mud of Marathon. Would the political experiments of the city-states have withered under the central rule of an empire that demanded absolute submission? Would she cultural renaissance have ideas had been crushed spark it needed if the cradle of its ideas crushed in the womb? These are the mysteries that keep historians awake at night, the what-if scenarios, a military skirmish. Marathon was merely a military skirmish. It was a pivot point upon which the trajectory of the world turned. The men who fought there were not fighting for victory, for gold or glory, but for the right to govern themselves, a concept that was still in its infancy. They were the first wave of a tide that would eventually define the Marathon into a symbol of defiance that still resonates with anyone who feels the odds are stacked against them. As we look back through the day has long settled, as we look back through the lens of Miltiades, yet the echo of the Athenian charge remains setikest. It serves as a reminder that strategy is not just about numbers, it is about the courage to act when the world expects you to kneel. As we conclude this look at one of history's most shocking upsets, consider how many other moments like this are hidden in the shadows of the past. History is a living, breathing entity, complex and often contracted to the time to dig lightly, but it always rewards those who take the time to dig deeper. If this journey through the plains of Marathon has sparked your curiosity, what other tales of underdog triumphs lie waiting in the annals of scribed and have those in the annals of time? Make sure you are scratched use of those notifications turned on. We have only scratched the surface of the strategic brilliance and at times sheer luck that have shaped our world. The story of Marathon backs our factor in the complex equation of conflict, and that leadership, terrain, and the human spirit often play the resolve of the hoplites. Whether it is the tactical genius of Miltiades or the unyielding resolve of the hoplites, these figures continue to teach us about the nature of power and the limits of imperial reach. Stay curious, keep analyzing as it was handed down to you. The past is not a question we are still trying to answer. It is a series of questions that we explore and exploration of how a single day of defiance changed the ancient world forever. Thank you. The legacy of Marathon lives on in every debate about strategy, every story of resistance, and every moment where the small stand up to the great. Think about these things the next time you find yourself staring at an insurmountable challenge, because history is rarely as settled as it seems on the surface. We will see you in the next installment, layers of another historical enigma. Until then, remember that even in the face of an empire power, there is always a strategy. There is always a strategy. And there is always a choice.